everyone. My name is Ayesha, and I've recently graduated from the Institute of Professional Psychology. I've done my bachelor's in professional psychology, and today I'm going to be talking about attachment styles in daily functioning in our everyday lives. So, Amna, if I could please see the slides. So, before I begin, you know how we are all unconsciously aware of our attachment styles, and a lot of things that we do in our daily lives has to do with our attachment styles. And next slide, Amna. So before we move on, let's ask ourselves a few questions, keeping in mind our mother or our father or our caregiver when we were a child. So let's ask ourselves these questions. So could my mother or my father read my emotions and respond in a way that made me feel like they understood how I felt? Next question. My mother or my father took genuine interest in me and expressed delight in who I was. I felt special and valued by them, and they expressed delight when they knew about my achievements or my successes. Lastly, I did not often worry about being abandoned. So keeping these questions in mind, a lot of you must be wondering where is this going, while some of you must have jumped onto that train and went back to your childhood. And you must have tried to recall a memory or a conversation with your parents that try to answer these questions that I put in front of you. Now, if you talk about attachment styles, I want you all to look at your childhood from a very different perspective, keeping these questions in mind. Next, Amna. So the question arises, where did the concept of attachment basically come from? Next slide, Amna. So we know that in the 1960s, there were two people studying the concept of attachment, namely John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. I'm pretty sure some of you know their names. They're quite famous people. And so Mary Ainsworth was one of the people there who did an experiment on the mother-child attachment. She called it the strange situation. And in this experiment, she tried to study the bond between the mother and the child by leaving the child alone in a room with a stranger. Now, in this experiment, there were a lot of things to be considered. So how did the child react when he first saw that stranger in the room? How did the child react when he was left alone in that room? And how did the child react when the mother or the caregiver returned back to the room? Next slide, Amna. So from this experiment and a lot of experiments after that, we found out that attachment develops in a very systematic way, you can say. So I've put forward a chart for you to question, and then keeping in mind your own childhood, you might as well relate to these questions as well. So the first question was, is the attachment figure being your mother or your father or any caregiver, sufficiently near to you? Were they attentive and were they responsive to your needs or your whatever you asked for? If the answer is yes, then the child feels security, they feel love, and they have this kind of self-confidence in themselves because their attachment figure had a listening ear for them mostly all the time. However, if this was not the case, a hierarchy of attachment behavior develops. Due to fear, it could be due to anxiety. And at first, when the child sees that the caregiver is not attentive, they are not sufficiently close to them, in proximity, or as well as close in the sense that you talk, you share each other's feelings, you're there for each other. And the caregiver is also not responsive to their needs. So what happens is at first the child begins to plead, they try to make eye contact with the caregiver, they try to signal to reestablish eye contact. However, what happens next is that if this sort of, you can say, relationship between the caregiver and the child has some sort of inconsistency. For example, if the caregiver is inconsistently not attentive, they're sometimes attentive, they're sometimes not attentive to the child's needs. Sometimes they're responsive and sometimes they couldn't care less if their child was asking for something or needed something. And this caregiver was mostly or inconsistently not there for the child. For example, you know how children are left alone at parks or they're left alone in the mall, but those are severe cases. For example, at home, if the child is playing with himself or playing by himself, and there the parent or caregiver is not close to the child. I mean, they're not in the same room even. So that is how the child becomes preoccupied with attachment figure. He becomes inconsistent himself, his feelings or his thoughts. He isn't sure of his feelings because sometimes the caregiver is there, sometimes the caregiver is responsive, and sometimes he isn't. That's why the child tends to become confused. I mean, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to love my parent, or am I supposed to detach myself from my parent? Because sometimes they're so in love with me and sometimes they couldn't care less about me. Similarly, however, if there is a consistent pattern of the caregiver or the parent being insufficiently near and not being attentive or not being responsive, then the child becomes defensive. He is scared. He is, he does not want the parent to be there. He does not want to make eye contact. And now the child couldn't care less if the parent is there. He becomes indifferent to separation, to reunion. He doesn't care if the parent is gone, and if the parent returns, he still couldn't care because the parent was never there. So now we see that these sort of experiences sort of leave a wound or a scar in our childhood. And ultimately, that itself, these wounds, these scars, these memories with our parents, whether they were there for us, whether they were not there for us, these things leave a mark. They always do. And when this is a pattern, it then manifests in our adulthood as well. Do you have any questions? I will be happy to answer your questions, or I can take them at the end of the session as well. What should we do, Amna?
Yeah. Well, if you guys have any question, you guys can either type in the chat box, or if you wanna ask by
Right,
you
new
can.
concept. So you might be having a lot of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe, just go ahead and, if
Amna,
there's something sorry, go ahead, Annie.
Amna, I think she can take question like in end of the session
End
because
of the
the way
session.
because
Okay,
the way she's going it, everybody who has a question just write it down. I would send chat and then we can do it in the end.
sounds good to me. Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Sounds good to me
All
too.
right. Go ahead, Aisha.
Right. Next, Amna. So we have to read this, right? Read this with me. So, just as children, we have an attachment figure in the room. We know that a mom or a dad is there and they're watching us and we feel safe. And in their presence, we know that my mom or my dad is watching me. So we'll feel safe to explore ourselves. We feel safe in that environment itself. And we have that confidence that I have my mom and I have my dad with me and they're going to listen to me. And similarly, as adults, we need someone who makes us feel safe and who gives us that confidence to go out there and aim for the best. As adults, we want the same thing, don't we? And sometimes it happens that when in our childhood, when our parents were there for us and they did give us that self-confidence, we similarly choose partners who are there for us and who give us that confidence. But when there is an imbalance between these two systems, when our parents were not there for us, or we felt like we couldn't explore ourselves, or we did not have that self-confidence, that manifests in our adulthood as a person who now looks for that self-confidence, who now looks for a person who can give them that self-confidence. And this is where we see the disparity and the imbalance, because how can you ask someone else to give you self-confidence? Self-confidence is something that you have to have with yourself. How can you ask someone to give you, yeah, it's fine that you need someone to make you feel safe, but nonetheless, your safety depends on yourself. You are afraid, yes, but having a partner who is there for you does make a difference. However, if you don't feel safe with yourself, you don't feel safe with your thoughts, with your feelings, then that's where we need to come close to understanding our attachment styles. Next.
Before we go to next slide, Aisha, I have a
Sure.
question. So if, like, whatever you're saying, if a person goes through, if a caretaker figure is not present while they're growing up, do in their adulthood, do they make when it comes to decision making, do they make decision out of low self-esteem? Does it cause low self-esteem as well? That's the
Yeah, I was just coming to that. In the next slide,
okay.
we're going to see how
All
that
right.
manifests itself. Yeah.
Okay.
The
Right.
gen-
So, as a child, we see how let's just ignore the part where we are talking about the secure attachment style, and let's talk about the anxious attachment style. For example, so as a child, if we start developing an anxious attachment with our parent or our caregiver, as an adult, that also tends to affect our self-esteem in the same way. For example, if your parent did not give you that sort of confidence, or did not talk to you well, or wasn't close to you, when you are transitioning into your adulthood, you feel a lack of self-esteem. You have low self-esteem, obviously, because when your parent is not there for you, when they don't give you that confidence to speak your mind, to talk about your feelings, then when you are as an adult, it feels really hard to talk to people, I mean strangers. If your own parents made you feel like you couldn't talk about yourself, you couldn't share things with them, then obviously when you become an adult, it becomes really hard to have that sort of self-esteem and confidence in front of strangers. So yes, Anna, I hope that answered your question, because when we are secure, when we have a secure attachment style, we are able to separate from our parents. We do seek comfort from our parents, and we do have we are met with positive emotions from our parents, and similarly we tend to have good self-esteem. It's very self-explanatory. However, when we don't have that sort of attachment with our parents, we do tend to have low self-esteem, and there are many problems. For example, if you look at the anxious attachment style, the person does not only have low self-esteem, they also worry that their partner or their friend does not love them back, because that, again, that comes from low self-esteem. When you if you have a friend, you know they're my friend and we have a good relationship. However, if you're an anxious person, you have an anxious attachment style, your brain is always trying to make you believe that no, you're not good enough, you won't, your partner will leave you, your friend might leave you, you're not good enough.
So you're
And
always seeking for validation, right? Am I
they
right?
always validation, exactly. They're always going to be asking their partner or their friends, like, do you like me, or am I good enough for you, am I not good enough for you? They always want that validation. And you know why? Because their brains are wired that way. They don't even know that they're seeking validation,
Mhm.
because from their childhood all they did was seek validation from their parents, from people around them. So when that validation is not answered, so in adulthood you start questioning your partner. You're like, am I good enough for him? I should dress up, I should do something, but I'm still not going to be good enough. And then you keep asking repeated questions for validation, you know. That is how these things manifest in your adulthood. So similarly, these people also become very upset when a relationship ends, because their anxious attachment style, they know that people will leave. They have this thing wired in their brain that people are going to leave me, I'm not good enough. So similarly, when a relationship ends, it's like the end of the world, because they think that they're not good enough and nothing good is ever going to happen if someone does not love me back. So
Mm.
that's why you have to take them out of that shell where they have been sort of, you know, protected themselves by thinking they're not good enough. Because the moment that they start thinking they're good, that they can do these things, that they are going to please their partner, their brain just comes in and tells them, no, you cannot. That is how the brain plays with their head. You know how our minds play with us all the time. We know we can do things, but somehow it's just like, no, you cannot do that. So
So
this is
funny,
how
yeah.
it's the opposite for them. It's to
Uh,
completely the opposite for them. When they want to be good, their brains will be like, no, you cannot. The brain always holds them back. And you know why? Because we want to be in a place that makes us feel familiar. We want to be with something that's familiar. And to
right.
them, being not good enough is familiar, and
Okay.
being good enough is unfamiliar. So that makes them feel unsafe. So they want to be in that safe place.
Yeah. And do you think people's pleaser fall into the same category?
Of course, it does.
Okay. Yeah.
Anxious people, the part where you talk about seeking validation, it comes from the fact that you want to please others. And pleasing people also has something, an underlying reason. That's because you're afraid of a person. And this usually happens with people of authority. Like in the workplace, when you have a boss, you really want to please your boss, you really want to please your co-workers, because you're afraid of them. It's a job and you have to be good, you have to complete
Yeah.
your work. So the underlying reason for people pleasing is fear. They're afraid of people, they're afraid of authority figures, they're afraid of others around them, that they will judge them, they will, you know,
Right.
point something out in them that is bad, or something, their bad qualities or something like that. So that's the underlying reason for people pleasing is fear, because they're always anxious. Your brain is always anxious
Mhm.
about it.
Okay.
So yeah, and then we have people with avoidant attachment styles. And although yes, in their childhood they did avoid their parents. That was a primary reason. They avoided their parents because their parents weren't there for them. Their parents didn't give them that validation. However, in their adulthood, they start shutting themselves down. You know how there's some of those people out there, I'm not saying that in a negative way, but some people are so hard to get through. You just can't get through them, you just can't talk to them. You know that they're upset, but they will not talk to you about it. I mean, you can see their face, but they will never open up to you. And these are people who have an avoidant attachment style with them. And because they're afraid, again, they are anxious and they are afraid to talk about their feelings because they think that they will not get the kind of validation that they're looking for because their parents did not give them that. So now they tend to invest little emotion in social and romantic relationships. So even if they're at a party, they will not talk to anyone. You'll see them at a corner, they will be there and
Shy
they might want
ones,
to talk to
or
you. Yeah.
sometimes
They will
people take them as a, like, somebody doesn't,
someone who is really dark.
doesn't belong there, or maybe.
Yeah, they don't belong there. You will always see them standing out of the crowd. They will not interact with anyone because they're afraid to talk about themselves, or just having normal friendships. It becomes really hard for them. They will always have one or two close friends that they do talk to. But then again, those friends, you know that those friends find it really hard to get through that person.
Yeah.
So even in the workplace, these are those kind of people who just check in, complete their work, go back home, no interaction whatsoever, because that's just how their brains are wired. I mean, they think that it's useless to talk to people. They're not going to get them. And that, again, they have their reasons from their childhood. So now, if we compare avoidant and anxious attachment styles with secure attachment style, a person who has a secure attachment style knew that their parents were there for them in their childhood. And so they tend to have good self-esteem, obviously, and they have trusting and lasting relationships, and they're comfortable with sharing their feelings with their friends and partners. Now, if you look at this point over here, that they're comfortable sharing their feelings with their friends and partners, sometimes a person who is anxious may seem the same to you as well. Anxious people tend to share a lot of their feelings with their friends and partners. And now you can try to understand that that stems from their childhood because they did not get to share those feelings with their parents. So now as an adult, they tend to blur things out. They tend to be very open. They're like an open book. And they'll always usually point out that I'm an open book and you can ask me anything and I'll tell you. And they usually start by sharing a lot of their trauma, a lot of their things from their childhood that they think were not enough for them. For example, they may start talking about how their mom wasn't there or their dad wasn't there. So they're very comfortable sharing their feelings with their friends and partners. And sometimes that does make the other person uncomfortable because, not everyone has the same mental bandwidth or capacity to listen to your problems. But anxious people tend to forget that the other person is not actually your really close friend or someone you can actually share everything with. So they don't see that you can trust that person or not. They just talk. As secure people, they know that they can talk to someone they trust. However, anxious people find it hard to just talk about something that's only with their friend or close friend or someone that they trust. So yeah, next. Is there any question? You can always type in the chat. I'm welcome to answer your questions. So now we come to the a question actually. So do you actually ever heal from your attachment style, or do you try to cope with your attachment style? Because healing is a very strong word. Healing means that you recover from something, you are recovering from something, but our attachment styles are not something that you recover from. Our attachment styles are, first of all, they're not something that are fixed. They are a part of your personality, a part of your personality traits. However, our personality can be dynamic. Our attachment styles can be dynamic. They can change. We can change as a person. So the concept of healing is sort of like you do not always heal from trauma. You actually learn how to cope with your trauma. So this is where, because you can see here that when we come from a place in our childhood where things did not make sense, where we were confused as to who should we talk to about our distresses, our problems. So as adults, we are still recovering from all those, from those memories, from those conversations that we had where it all began. So we always find ourselves too critical and of ourselves. We become so self-conscious about ourselves because people who are aware, for example, I am aware of my attachment style. And trust me, sometimes I get to a point where I am so self-critical of myself that I'm always like, stop. Don't do this because you have done this or have experienced this in your past, so stop doing this. No, that's not always the case. Sometimes you just have to let things go in a flow. You have to learn how to cope. You don't have to tell yourself that this is wrong and I need to fix this. You just need to cope with it. You don't need to fix anything because this is going to be a part of yourselves. The first step towards recovering or coping from our attachment styles is realizing that we don't need to fix anything, we just need to cope with it. And you need to keep telling yourself that I am good and I'm good enough and I can do things and I'm not letting anything hold me back. Positive self-talk is the first step to realizing that you have a problem and you need to cope with that problem, not fix that problem.
Aisha, I think
So
there is a comment or feedback, not kind of comment, not exactly a
yeah,
question.
yeah.
I'm gonna
Oh
read
yeah,
it. Or
thank you for
I'll
pointing
read
it
it.
out.
It says, I do think healing is possible from Fumi. I do think healing is possible from a place of deliberate will to change, one step at a time without being too critical of oneself and acknowledging the growth. Your take?
Yeah, I get that. For me, I get that because yes, we're not going to, be negative about healing. Of course, healing is possible, but here we are talking about acceptance. So even if you do not heal, you can always accept yourself, can't you? Even if others don't accept you, you can always accept yourself. You can always tell yourself that I'm here and I'm doing my best. Even if I'm wrong, I'm still trying. I'm still accepting myself. So acceptance is a key over here. Thank you for that comment, Fumi. Thank you so much. Next.
Um, all right. Yeah, there's, that's it. I mean, I do have a question, but I think I'll keep it for later. You go ahead.
Right. Is it moving on?
Next slide. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, like I said, we have to learn how to cope and we have to learn how to accept. So, here are a few useful tools for people who have avoidant tendencies. If you know someone, if you think that for the notes that I point, those are not fixed traits or personalities. Those were just some checkpoints that we know that we have experienced or seen some people or ourselves. So if you know someone or if you have avoidant tendencies, you think you may have some characteristics of a person who had an avoidant attachment style. So first of all, you have to be willing to acknowledge your childhood pain. It's not necessarily pain always, but sometimes as a child, we think that some things did not make sense. They hurt us. So for us, that is pain. Even if those were rational things, those were rational moments, those were rational conversations. However, if those hurt us, if we think that our mom or our dad or our caregiver said something or did something that hurt us, you have to be willing to acknowledge your childhood pain, and then you have to start small. So a person with avoidant tendencies tends to get very overwhelmed with people. They tend to avoid people, right? So they get overwhelmed when someone else starts talking to them or starts asking them to share something. So you have to start small. So you have to open up parts of yourself slowly. The parts of yourself that you shut down for some reason, things that you like to do, things that you wanted to talk about but you couldn't talk about. So you have to open up those parts of yourself by showing yourself the kind of love and the kind of compassion that you want for others, because we need to keep in mind that avoidant people, they're not cold hearted. They have feelings. They do care about other people. However, they just don't want other people to talk to them about those feelings, and they don't want themselves to talk about those feelings with other people. So if you are someone with avoidant tendencies or you know someone with avoidant tendencies, you need to tell themselves and yourself that you have to be kind to yourself. You have to know that I am worthy of being taught, having a conversation with someone. I am worthy of the kind of love and compassion that I want for someone else. I can give that to myself as well. And then you have to also, when avoidant people, sometimes they come off as rude because they don't want to talk to you. So sometimes when things get too much, they feel overwhelmed, so they tend to dismiss people. This is a category of avoidant people. They are dismissive avoidant, so they dismiss people a lot. They tend to dismiss feelings. They tend to push people away abruptly, suddenly. So for that, you need to be mindful when you start to feel overwhelmed and when you start to feel like you don't want to be where you are. So you have to be mindful and apologize to the other person as well, because they don't know that what you have gone through. They don't know what your personality is, what you are going through. So you need to apologize if you come off as rude, because that's the first step to realizing that you are human and so is the other person. They also have feelings, right? And then you have to come on to learning ways of working out differences with other people, because with avoidant people, they have troubles in having a relationship or being in a relationship because they do not match, I would say, with the other person. They have trouble in, how we say opposites attract, yes, but sometimes you need to work out those opposites with the person. You need to work out your differences with a person. So person with avoidant tendencies may feel like they are not good at being in a relationship. They're not a good boyfriend, not a good girlfriend, or not a good husband or a good wife. So you need to work out those differences with your partner. You sit down and tell them why you think that way. And then you have to also, most importantly, the last point that I would say here is that you have to get comfortable with having needs and wants. Because when you, as an avoidant person, when you shut yourself down, you are shutting yourself down from your own needs and your own wants. So you have to make yourself realize that you have, as a person, you have needs and you have wants, and that is very normal. And you need to acknowledge that. And then you should go and work that out for yourself. You should go out and seek what you want, what you need, and then communicate those needs with people, like-minded people. Communicate what you want, what you need with other people, because shutting yourself down is only going to hold you back, right? Next, please. Right. So let's talk about some useful tools for anxious people who have anxious tendencies, or someone you know who might have anxious tendencies. So the first step is to reassure yourself from your fears and your self-doubt. You need to keep telling yourself, I am good enough. I am do, I'm not a bad person. I'm not someone who is clingy, or I'm not someone who isn't worthy of love. I am good enough. You need to give yourself a hug. This is literally therapy. We learned this in therapy, that whenever you feel down, whenever you think that no one loves you, you just have to hold yourself and you have to give yourself a big hug and tell yourself that you are good enough, and you need to reassure yourself, just like we do with children, and this actually comes from, how we work with children. As a child, if you did not get that hug or you did not get that reassurance from your primary caregiver, so right now just hug yourself and tell yourself as a child that I'm good, and I was good enough back then, and I'm good enough right now. So next we have setting boundaries. So here, I know some people think that boundaries are quite harsh. I mean, and it's very hard to set boundaries for an anxious person, because like I said, they are an open book. They tend to just blurt out their feelings, their emotions. It's very hard. Their emotions are everywhere, and it's very hard for them to control those emotions. So first step to this is setting boundaries. When you feel like you are acting out due to your fears, and when you feel like you are projecting your emotions, I hope people here know what projection means. Projection is,
Elaborate it a little bit.
yeah, projection is, this usually happens, it's like a self defense mechanism, where when you are not direct with someone, you are indirect. So you tend to project your feelings and thoughts onto the other person. For example, if you dislike someone, you are going to be like, they don't like me, even though you don't like them. So that is called projection. So for example, an anxious person might tell the other person that I feel like you don't like me, or I feel like you are going to leave me, when instead they think that that person is going to leave them. So it's a whole cycle of being, opposite feelings that are being projected onto the other person. So this is where,
I want to add one thing. I recently got to know somebody, through group, and they were talking about, like, we are running support group as well. So they were having issues at their workplace, and actually, it just reminds you, the projection. It just reminds me of one thing. That person said, I am having vibes from my coworker that they don't like me. So my question was, like, from everybody, and she says yes, but not the new manager. And she was a new hire, sorry, assistant manager, and she was new hire. So what I'm saying, um, it could be projection, probably she doesn't like, I mean, everybody in the workplace.
Or she's afraid that they don't like her, so she's projecting that. I feel like
Yeah, yeah.
there's a underlying fear that I feel like they don't like me, so
Uh-huh.
you're just like, so that is projection. And anxious people do that a lot. They tend to project their feelings of unworthiness on someone else. They feel like, you know what, you're not good enough for me, even though they feel like they're not good enough for the other person. So this is where a lot of fights tend to happen between themselves and their partners or people around them. And
Mhm.
secondly, another tool is that you
I,
need
I
anxious
have an. Do
people.
you want to take another question from Annie? There's a question. Or you
Sure,
want
sure,
to? Okay,
sure.
Annie, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, and
Aisha, you were talking about the projection. Okay, I have a question. Like you said that you don't like other person, but you said about the other people that they don't they don't like you or they're gonna leave you. What if the person, like you said, is has maybe issues that he or she cannot get along with other people, but they are not like, and we are talking about relationship, but they are not like leaving the partner, but they think that the other person is gonna is it possible that they think that, like projecting, that the other person is going to leave them or not going to like them, but they are
this
not
is the
leaving.
Yep, this is the whole point here that anxious people do that a lot. They tend to think that, that the person is going to leave me and they're not good enough, and they don't communicate that directly. If you do feel that way, just tell your partner that you're feeling, you have this fear inside you that you are not good enough and they are going to leave. But what you do say is that you will leave me, but you never say that I am not good enough or I'm not good enough, because that is hard to say it out loud, right? But saying out loud that you are going to leave me, because that just throws everything on the other person, not you. So that's
so
easier to say out loud.
so how to get out of that anxious behavior? Because what you are talking and what I'm understanding is that anxious person doesn't know that they're anxious, and we don't know what is the limit of that. Like they might be anxious, somebody might be
That
anxious all the time because of too
all the
much.
Yeah, that's
And that,
because it's been there from their past, right? From their childhood. So the first
yeah,
step is to love yourself. You have to tell yourself that you're good enough. And you know how we are always we are afraid to take compliments. कोई हमें कहता है ना कि तुम इतनी अच्छी लग रही हो, you look so pretty today, but you're like, no, I don't. I'm not. How I didn't even brush my hair. I didn't even brush my teeth. What are you saying? I don't even have foundation on. How can I look good? So that there is the first step that you have to change. You have to be like, oh, thank you. Thank you for that compliment. Just take that compliment.
मैं ऐसी थी, मगर मैं बहुत ज्यादा, वो कहते हैं ना, आप शक करते हो अगर कोई आपको जैसे, क्योंकि मसला ये है कि जब आप, मैं नाम लेना चाहती किसी का भी, जब आप बहुत नेगेटिव फीडबैक लेते हो ना अपनी सराउंडिंग से, और आपको कोई वही बंदा या कोई और बंदा कहे
Become
क्या
that way.
आप अच्छे हो, तो आप कहते हो नहीं, मैं तो अच्छी नहीं हूँ, शायद इसके साथ ही कुछ गलत है, इसको नजर नहीं आ रहा,
नहीं
मेरे
आ
अंदर
रहा
तो
होता, नहीं आता. It's very hard. You cannot see that you are good. लेकिन anxious people वही बात है. Their brains are wired that way. उनका दिमाग ही इस तरह हो गया होता है कि it's very hard for them to take compliments, to realize that their worth. So that's why they're always pointing it out to the other person. You don't like me. I think you don't like me, and I think that you're not happy in this relationship, when they themselves could not be happy in the relationship because of their problems with their self-worth, because they don't feel good enough, so they think this relationship is not going to work out, so they point out to the other person, you should leave, or you want to leave, I think you want to leave.
एंड
So this
आई एम रियली सॉरी, मैं भी इसलिए बात कर रही हूँ, मुझे नहीं पता मीटिंग के एंड में मैं रहती हूँ या नहीं, क्योंकि अभी मैं घर में
sure.
सिर्फ मैं, हस्बैंड नहीं है, तो मुझे ये पूछना है कि जैसे मैं बहुत कोशिश करती हूँ, मैंने अपनी लाइफ में ये देखा है कि आप, मैं
Excuse me,
पीपल
Annie, can you talk in English? Because there are few people, they
ओके,
don't understand
मोस्टली,
Urdu. I
थैंक
want
यू,
everybody to be on the same page.
that's okay, that's okay. Mostly in my life, I would say I have learned, or I have adapted a behavior to please people around me. You understand? Like, if I'm not gonna please him, that person is gonna leave me, or what's gonna happen. Isn't that
What I
same
just
thing?
talked about
Same
before.
thing with my son. Can you explain that, please?
You see that what? I'm sorry you got cut
Same,
off.
same thing is in my little kid. Like, a fear, like if somebody get married, we try to please them. You understand that? Like, please beyond, like, like, okay, I'm gonna please you, just be there, just listen to
Yeah.
me.
When
Yeah.
this is where you also have to tell him that he is good enough. So pleasing someone and telling them that they're good enough is different. So if kids imitate our behavior. Kids always imitate. They never learn, they always imitate us, you know. They never learn, they're always imitating things around them. So the moment that you start telling him that, you know, I am not going to please you, or you don't have to please anyone else. We are here and we are confident people. We don't have to please anyone.
Yes, I
Hello?
tell him mom is happy. I
Yeah,
tell him that mom is happy. Mommy, don't be scared. Mommy is not angry with you. You know, it's just I was
yes,
explaining because we can do things
exactly.
make better.
Always talk to your kids, always. If you think that they are having that people pleasing behavior in them, increase their self-confidence, increase their self-esteem, you know, make them realize that they're a good person and they're good at this or they're good at that, and they don't need that sort of validation from someone else by pleasing that other person, right? Pleasing
I
is fine to an extent that you are happy about it, but the moment it starts draining you out, when you feel like, you know, I have to do this, otherwise they won't like me. That's when the problem arises. That's when you cannot just keep on pleasing everyone when it's not making you happy. So you need to ask yourself that, am I happy? Am I actually happy doing this? Am I actually happy pleasing this person or doing this for that person? If you're not, then this is where you tell yourself and question yourself, I'm having problems with my self-worth and my self-esteem, and I need to fix that.
I have
Right? I hope you got that.
I have two boys. Okay, this is the last thing. Maybe it helps somebody. I have two boys. One is 11. One is going to be 7 in December. Okay. Now the 11-year-old is the one that do things that he knows his mom is not gonna like it. Okay, things that are gonna cause a problem, but he do it anyways. And then he said that I hope he don't. I don't think so. He pretend. I know my kid. He's like I forgot. You know, I didn't mean to or this and that. But I know he has a good heart. Now the little one. I'm talking about the 7-year-old. I don't know why he adapted. He's like he tried to make things like calm and relax. You understand? Like like he didn't mean that, mommy. Like try taking his side, trying to always make us happy. And I'm worried, because he's very sensitive kid.
Yeah, so that this is where you need to communicate with them that, like, I know where you're coming from, and I know that you're saying that because you're afraid that I will scold you, but just don't do these things. Because tell them the reason why they shouldn't do that, and then also validate what they're trying to say. You'll be like, yes, I understand you, I get it, I should be understanding what he's saying, but then again, I am the parent and you're the child, right? So there are some things that I know, and I know that some things are not, these are the rules in our house and this is going against the rules in the house. So if you guys could understand my point of view like I'm understanding yours, so this is how you collaborate with your child, this is how you communicate with your child. Just
But
talk to them. I
I
honestly just talk, keep on listening to them, whatever they're saying, just make them feel like they're heard.
I did, but I need help from all of you. The 11-year-old is telling him like I catched him several times saying it. Don't tell to mommy. You and the way he talks like this, you are not going to tell mommy. Like you understand, like a threat. Like if you're gonna do
Yeah,
this, I'm gonna do that. And he honestly he do that. I'm really worried about him. How can I just go on whatever you are presenting? But please also help and let me know how to help and
I'll
get
get
him
back to
out
you.
of this. Thank you.
Even if the session is over, we'll just talk on private, no problem.
Yeah, we
Right.
can, talk about the individual like in a support group setup later.
Yeah, we'll do
Okay,
that.
and I'll
Sure.
make a note and I'll arrange something with Aisha and Annie. Okay, 1-to-1.
Okay, so I
Thank you.
was on
Thank
third or last point. Let me see. Yeah. So
Yeah.
another thing I was talking about was not. Yes, you can be an open book, of course, but then again, you have to see, is the other person worth your trust? Are they trustworthy enough to the fact that you're sharing all of those feelings, all of those memories, those moments of yourself from your past or in the present? Is that person trustworthy enough to be talking about all of those things with you? So this is why anxious people find it hard to trust the other person. I mean, they do trust people, but then again, they also don't trust the other person because that person will not always give them that validation that they're looking for after sharing those feelings. So you need to share or talk about things that you feel are hurting you with people who earn your trust. For example, earning your trust is very important. So someone who is very close to you, has been your friend for a long time, your partner who earns your trust, those people are worthy of knowing about you, your past, your scars, your trauma, whatever. And then having patience, like I said over here, is very important. You need to have patience with the fact that not everyone is going to meet your needs and your wants all the time, because the trouble is with anxious people, because they did not get that those needs and wants validated in their childhood. So now they seek that immediately. They want that validation, that acknowledgement very quickly. They want someone to just be like, yeah, I get you, I understand you, you're absolutely right. But that's not always the case. No one always agrees with you, am I right? People will disagree with you. So you need to have that patience and you need to have that understanding that people might not always agree with you and they will take time to understand what you're trying to say. And I face this a lot in my relationships because I'm going to tell you, I have anxious attachment style issues. I do. So I always do this a lot. I am very impatient. If someone does not agree with me, I tend to be like, how are you not agreeing with me? Agree with me right now. And how did you not agree with me? I mean, I think that I'm right. It's very hard for me to try to realize that sometimes we can have disagreements. It's okay if someone does not agree with you, but sometimes I get to a point where I'm just like, I am right. How can you not believe me? So this is very hard, and this is where patience is key. You need to have a lot of patience when you're trying to see if someone agrees with you or not. And if they do disagree with you, have an open mind and try to have that perspective of understanding the other person, because we all come from a very different place. If I have issues, so does the other person, right? So we have to just try to have patience, and because if one day we try to understand them, they are also automatically, hopefully, going to understand us too. And lastly, you should try not to get personal. And by this is not pointing it out negatively, just trying not to get too personal is when you think that someone dislikes you or does not agree with you, you tend to start questioning everything that happened with that person. You tend to question their behavior, their thoughts, their feelings. And this is where you also then take that on yourself. You get so personal with yourself that they just don't like me because I'm this and I'm that. And sometimes that's not always the case, because someone might just disagree with you for the sake of the argument. They might just disagree because you were just arguing. You don't have to take that to yourself in the sense that you start questioning everything about yourself, that where did you say something that was out of context, did you say something that wasn't right, and all of that. So try not to get too personal when someone says something that hurts you or something that is not in agreement with you. So here, I guess I'm going to end. Now, I hope all of this information was very helpful, because I guess we don't have time, but the next slide is almost over. Amna, can you show the next slide?
Sure.
Yep. So we're done with attachment styles and daily functioning.
There's one, I mean, from me, and actually it's one of the group member. She left a
Sure.
comment, and I want to ask you: is it possible to have combination of two attachment styles?
This is sort of like, how do I point it? Okay, wait, let me show you something. Hold on.
Okay. Let me know if you want me to go back to any slide.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll just share my screen for now. This is something that all right, hold on. Right. Here we see that attachment is, it's a spectrum of a lot of things. All right, so yes, you may have feelings of being avoidant, you may have feelings of being anxious as well. For example, if in your childhood, I'm going to go back, I always go back to the childhood. That is where everything began. So if your caregiver was inattentive to you, they did not validate your feelings, and when they were actually there for you, when they did validate your feelings, in those moments you may feel anxious, you may feel confused, and you may start being fearful. But then again, you may become fearful and avoidant as well. So here, this is a whole scale. It's a lot of information for now, but how about we go over here? We go at high anxiety and fearful, all right, and high avoidance. So here, these people display low self-esteem, low sociability, and they're fearful of intimacy, and they're socially avoidant. However, they have high anxiety. So this is how they all interact with each other, because Anxiety is there. It's not just regardless of your attachment style. Anxiety is always there. So a person who has an anxious attachment style will be afraid of people, and they might not interact with people. Then they might be afraid of trusting people. They might be afraid of being intimate with someone because they fear that that person will leave them. So then they will become avoidant.